In the lawless sweep of 1885 Texas, Dahlia Blackwood never expected her life to be rewritten in a single heartbeat, but that's exactly what happened the day Jackson Xanders stepped out of the crowd and claimed her as his wife to save her from the auction block. What began as a desperate rescue soon tangled them in danger, secrets, and a past determined to destroy them both. Yet with every mile they rode and every threat they faced, their fragile bond grew stronger. And when love finally struck between bullets, betrayal, and buried treasure, Dahlia learned that freedom wasn't just escape. It was finding someone worth fighting for. The sun hung mercilessly over Red Bluff, Texas, turning the dirt road into a shimmering gold ribbon and burning the skin of anyone who stood too long beneath its glare. The town buzzed like a disturbed hornet's nest, shop doors slamming, boots scuffing against planks, horses shifting restlessly in the heat. But all that noise faded into a distant hum for Dahlia Blackwood, who stood barefoot on the wooden platform at the center of the commotion. The auction block. She could feel every splinter through the thin soles of her worn shoes. She tried to keep her chin high, but humiliation sat heavy in her chest, fighting for dominance over the fear crawling up her throat. She pressed her hands together to keep them from shaking, her wrists still red from where she had been held earlier by the sheriff's deputies. This was the price of her father's mistakes, or rather, his debts. Her father had been a dreamer, a man with ideas bigger than his pockets. Dahlia had loved him fiercely, even through his failings. But he had left behind unpaid loans, angry men, and promises he never kept. And once he died, those debts had fallen on her shoulders like a coffin lid closing. "She'll fetch a decent price," someone muttered from the crowd, his voice dripping with foul greed. "Pretty enough for housework," another man said. "Or other things." The crowd chuckled darkly. Dahlia swallowed back her rising panic. She refused to let them see her break. She would not cry, not here, not in front of men who decided that a woman alone was nothing more than an opportunity for ownership. Sheriff Lundy cleared his throat. He didn't look at her with cruelty, but with the cold neutrality of a man doing a job he'd done too many times. Dahlia Blackwood, indebted in the amount of $130. Sold to the highest bidder. Bidding starts at. Before he could finish, a hand shot up. "I'll pay 30. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some impressed, some eager, some annoyed at the boldness. The sheriff nodded and prepared to call for another bid. Dahlia's stomach twisted. She recognized the man offering. Harlan Briggs, a rancher known for having a trail of broken women and broken bottles in his wake. "No," Dahlia whispered under her breath, though no one heard, or cared. 40, someone else called. 50. 60. The crowd's voices rose like vultures circling fresh meat. Dahlia felt dizzy, as if the air had grown too thin to breathe. She searched the crowd for a friendly face, any face, but found none. Then the heat shifted. A strange stillness swept across the makeshift marketplace, a small break in the chaotic energy. A man stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, dusty from the trail, and unfamiliar to everyone. His hat shadowed his eyes, but Dahlia saw a firmness in the set of his jaw. He looked like he had ridden hard to get here, his coat still stirring with the movement, his boots caked in dried mud, his breath slightly heavy. "Hold up," he said, voice deep and steady. Sheriff Lundy frowned. "Do you have a bid, stranger?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and slowly pulled out a folded document. He didn't raise it high, just enough for the sheriff to take notice. "No bid," the stranger replied. "Because she ain't for sale." Dahlia's breath hitched. The crowd murmured. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Explain yourself." The man unfolded the paper and handed it to him. "Name's Jackson Xanders," he said. "Dahlia Blackwood is my wife." Time froze. It didn't make sense, Dahlia had never seen this man in her life. Her pulse hammered so loudly she could barely hear the crowd erupt. Her husband. "She ain't married," someone yelled. "That paper forged," another shouted. But Jackson didn't flinch. He stood solid, unwavering, as though this moment had always belonged to him. Sheriff Lundy lifted the document, squinting at it. His lips moved silently as he read, his frown deepening. "This is a marriage certificate." "It's valid," Jackson said, tone calm but firm. "Signed by Reverend Collings in Blackwater Crossing. Dated 3 months back." He turned slightly, glancing at Dahlia for the first time. His eyes were steady, warm, nothing like the hungry stares she had endured all morning. "I've been away on cattle business. I only just heard word about the debts and came straight here." Dahlia's breath trembled. She didn't know what game he was playing, but she understood one thing with startling clarity: this stranger was trying to save her. Sheriff Lundy looked from the document to Dahlia. "Is this true, Miss Blackwood?" Dahlia froze. The crowd's eyes bore into her, hungry for a slip, a mistake, anything to undo the man's claim. But Jackson tilted his head slightly, giving her a subtle, reassuring nod. For the first time in weeks, she felt her spine straighten without effort. "Yes," Dahlia said softly, her voice trembling but audible. "Jackson is my husband." The crowd erupted again, half disbelief, half irritation. Some cursed. Others spat. Harlan Briggs pushed through the front. "That's a lie. She ain't never been married," he barked, pointing a thick finger at her. "I've seen her around town since her old man died. She don't know this fellow." Jackson stepped between Dahlia and the crowd with quiet authority. "Easy there, friend." Briggs glared. "You forged that paper." Jackson didn't blink. "Careful what you say. Accusing a married man of forgery is a serious claim. Can you prove otherwise?" He stepped closer, voice lowering to something sharp and dangerous. "Because I can prove she's my wife." Briggs swallowed, unsure whether he wanted to push this further. The sheriff cleared his throat again. "I ain't got reason to doubt this paper," Lundy said reluctantly. "If the lady says it's true, then the auction's cancelled." Dahlia exhaled shakily, her knees nearly giving out. The sheriff cut her bindings, and she rubbed her wrists, numb with disbelief. Without waiting for permission, Jackson placed a gentle but firm hand on her elbow. "Come on, Dahlia. Let's go home." Home. She didn't know where he was taking her. She didn't know his motives. But when he guided her down from the platform, shielding her from reaching hands and crude comments, she felt, strangely, impossibly, safe. He led her to a chestnut horse, hoisted her onto the saddle as though she weighed nothing, and mounted behind her. The crowd parted, shouting, protesting, whispering, but none of it mattered. Jackson wrapped one arm around her waist, not tight, just steady, and nudged the horse forward. As they galloped out of Red Bluff, dust swirling behind them, Dahlia allowed herself to lean slightly into his chest, even though she didn't fully trust him. But behind fear, beneath the confusion, something else stirred. A spark of hope. A hint of freedom. A future she hadn't dared to imagine. And she whispered into the wind, as the town vanished behind them. "Thank you." Jackson didn't reply, but she felt the quiet strength in the way he held the reins and her fate in the same steady hands. The ride from Red Bluff felt endless, though the horizon stretched open and inviting. Dahlia didn't know where Jackson Xanders was taking her, only that every mile put her farther from the men who'd tried to buy her. Heat clung to the air, and cicadas buzzed along the thorny mesquite trees. Jackson rode steady behind her, his presence warm and solid, though he spoke barely a word. When they finally reached a small ranch nestled near a dry riverbed, just a modest cabin, a barn, a couple of fences, Jackson reined in the horse. "This is home," he said quietly. "For now, anyway." Dahlia slid down from the saddle, her legs trembling. The little ranch wasn't grand, but it looked peaceful, sun-worn wood, smoke curling faintly from the chimney, the scent of hay in the air. It was the first place she'd seen in weeks that didn't make her tighten her jaw. "You can rest inside," Jackson said. "I gave my word to protect you. I meant it." She didn't understand why he had done it. Why risk himself for a woman he didn't know? Why forge a marriage certificate? Why step into danger for someone with nothing to offer? But the truth could wait. For now, survival was enough. The first days were strange, quiet, cautious. Jackson gave Dahlia space. He didn't demand chores, didn't expect gratitude, didn't push for conversation. He slept in the barn, leaving her the cabin. At sunrise, she'd find him tending the livestock, fixing fences, or cutting wood. He worked with a calm steadiness that soothed the frayed edges of her nerves. One evening, while she sat outside peeling potatoes, she finally asked, "Why did you save me that day?" Jackson paused mid-swing of his axe. Wiped his brow. Met her gaze. "Because you deserved better," he said simply. "And because I've seen too many good people crushed by men with power. I figured it was time someone did something." His answer stirred something deep inside her, something warm, unfamiliar, and dangerously hopeful. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. The first sign of trouble came a week after her arrival. A ranch hand from town came riding fast toward the ranch, dust flying behind him. "Xanders," he shouted. "You got trouble comin'. Briggs and his boys, 5 of them, they're headed this way. They been drinkin' and hollerin' about tucking the woman back." Dahlia's blood ran cold. Jackson didn't flinch. He nodded once, then turned to her. "Inside. Bolt the door. Don't come out till I say." Fear clawed at her throat. "You can't fight them alone." "I won't be alone," he said, loading his rifle. "You're worth fighting for, Dahlia. Now go." His words struck her harder than the threat itself. Worth fighting for. No man had ever said that to her, certainly not her father, who had gambled her safety away piece by piece. She obeyed. Inside the cabin, her hands shook as she slid the bolt across the door. She peeked through the narrow shutters, heart hammering. The men arrived in a cloud of dust. Briggs dismounted first, swaggering toward Jackson with a cruel grin. "That ain't your wife," Briggs snarled. "And she owes me. Her father owed me. Hand her over." Jackson stood firm. "She's not merchandise. Ride home, Briggs." Briggs spat. "I paid for her at auction. She's mine." "No," Jackson replied, voice low and sharp. "She belongs to herself." The fight erupted fast. Briggs lunged. Jackson swung first. A fist smashed against a jaw. Dust flew. Men shouted. Gunmetal glinted in the sun, but Jackson moved with surprising precision, knocking weapons away, keeping the brawl within fists and grit rather than bullets and blood. In minutes, 3 men were on the ground groaning, 1 fled, and Briggs was pinned under Jackson's boot, face in the dirt. "You come back here again," Jackson warned, "and I won't let you walk away." Briggs cursed, but fear flickered in his eyes. When Jackson finally let him up, he scrambled onto his horse and fled like a beaten dog. When the dust settled, Jackson exhaled and called out, "Dahlia. It's safe now." She burst from the cabin before he could take a step toward it. She ran to him, hands shaking as she touched his arm. "You could have been killed," she whispered. He shrugged softly. "I've faced worse." Her throat tightened. This man, who owed her nothing, had stood between her and danger with the ferocity of someone defending family. She didn't know what to call the feeling that swelled through her chest, but it terrified her as much as it comforted her. As the days passed, threats didn't fully disappear, men like Briggs rarely accepted defeat. But life settled into a fragile rhythm. Dahlia cooked, helped tend the garden, mended the few worn shirts Jackson owned. Jackson repaired the roof, built her a small shelf for the books she'd managed to keep from her father's old trunk, and brought her wildflowers from the prairie without comment. One stormy night, while rain hammered the roof and thunder shook the plains, Dahlia couldn't sleep. She stepped outside to find Jackson sitting on the porch, staring at the lightning streaking across the sky. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "You. Storms keep me thinking." She hesitated before sitting beside him. "About what?" He exhaled slowly. "Your father." Dahlia stiffened. "He wasn't a bad man," she whispered, voice wavering. "Just lost." Jackson nodded. "I know. But there's something I need to show you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather satchel. Inside was a map, worn, stained, but undeniably valuable. "Your father left this with a friend of mine months ago," Jackson said. "Said it was collateral. But I think it was more than that. I think he meant for you to have it." Dahlia traced the map with trembling fingers. It marked a place in the hills, a symbol for an old Spanish mine. Something her father had always spoken of like a drunken dream. "You think there's treasure," she whispered. "I think there's something worth looking for," Jackson replied. "And whatever it is, it's yours." The mine wasn't filled with gold. But it held something better, a hidden stash of coins, old tools, and a small wooden box containing silver nuggets worth more than her father had ever managed to earn. Enough to clear debts. Enough to start a life. Enough to build a future. When Dahlia turned to Jackson, her eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked at her then, not as a stranger, not as someone he'd rescued, but with a softness that broke down the last of her defenses. "Because I care about you," he said quietly. "More than I meant to. More than I should." Her breath caught. "And if I care too?" He smiled, slow and warm. "Then that's the best thing I've heard in years." Spring painted the plains green when Jackson finally knelt before her, no audience, no ceremony, just the two of them under the vast Texas sky. "Dahlia Blackwood," he said, holding her hands, "I know our beginning wasn't real. But everything since then has been. If you'll have me, not as your rescuer, not as your protector, but as the man who loves you, I'd be honored to be your husband." Tears slid down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. "Yes, Jackson. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding was simple, just a preacher, a witness, and the sound of wind whispering through the grass. But their life afterward was rich, laughter in the kitchen, long rides along the plains, a baby's cry echoing in the cabin one autumn morning, and the growth of a ranch built from nothing but hard work and devotion. For Dahlia, love had once seemed impossible. Freedom, unimaginable. But with Jackson, she found both, willingly, wholly, beautifully. She had been rescued from a life she never chose. But with him, she built the life she truly wanted. A life forged from courage. A life built on trust. A life held together by a love worth fighting for.